So, welcome everybody.
Welcome to our panel discussion on cell and gene therapies, ethics and regulation. My name is Lara.
And my name is Leonard. And we have amazing guests for tonight. Most of you in this room are either science enthusiasts, young students, PhD students, postdocs, group leaders, and you're probably deeply invested in your research. And if you're anything like us, you've had that one late night thought when you were in the lab at night and you're staring at your results and you asked yourselves, will my work actually end up helping people?
And we ask ourselves that exact same question. We are this year's iGEM Team Heidelberg 2025 and we are participating in the largest competition for synthetic biology. This year, our project is focusing on developing logic-based cell systems designed to more specifically and also more safely target solid tumors like pancreatic cancer. But designing such powerful and novel cell therapies is of course only the first step. To make sure our project has a chance of reaching the patient, we really need to understand what comes next.
And what we found is that the journey is incredibly long and complex. You often hear the statistic that it takes around 17 years for a discovery to actually reach the patient. 17 years. The question is, why?
Well, take a look at this graph. So it usually starts with a scientific discovery in the lab. You find a drug that shows a lot of promise. You can then go into clinical trials, trying to prove safety and efficacy. But, unfortunately, around 90% of drugs fail at this stage. If you are among the lucky ones, you can then try to get market approval by EMA. This is the Medical European Agency. But this process is also super complex itself.
But even EMA approval is just the start. Pricing and reimbursement decisions are made individually by each European country. This process is often fragmented, complicated, and can significantly delay patient access.
But Lenny, what about all the other critical pieces, like patient ethics, or the high prices of cell and gene therapies, and the effect on the healthcare system, or even how we share data among all these stages, or also the social dialogue around all these new technologies?
Exactly, Lara. And that's why, to help bring clarity into this whole topic, we have a panel of amazing guests tonight, which we will introduce in just a sec. Before that, we will have a few more facts about the current state of cell and gene therapies, and then we'll go right into the panel. Europe has fewer than half the number of approved cell and gene therapies compared to the US. That's 20 versus 43.
In the first 3 quarters of last year, European developers raised nearly 6 times less funding than American developers. That's $2 billion versus almost 12 billion.
And we've seen that even powerful cell therapies like Glubera, which were approved by the EMA, are taken out of the market due to pricing and reimbursement issues.
Well, guys, that sounds like a challenge we need to tackle head on. I would say let's get started. Lenny will be moderating this panel discussion tonight. Lenny, over to you.
Thank you, Lara. Okay, to begin, I'd like each of you to introduce themselves and tell us why you accepted our invitation tonight and what you want to teach the audience or tell the audience. So you can start.
That's a huge honor to start. Thank you for having me. I'm very glad to being here. I'm a patient representative and a researcher at DKFZ. I'm in the NCT Research Council. My name is Julian Friedrich. I should have started with that. And I'm trying to start a children's oncology patient involvement group as well. And I think there's huge potential in cell and gene therapy for patients. There's a big hope for patients in that, and patient involvement in that topic is not so big yet. It's kind of pioneering work, so I'm glad to learn more about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
continue? So,
Yes, please.
my name is Eva Winkler. I am an oncologist and also part of the managing directorate of the National Center of Tumor Diseases here. That's one head. My research is in medical ethics, and I'm also heading the Institute for Medical and Data Ethics, which is in the very same building here. And I thought it's very exciting, this gene therapies. We see that we can really help patients with CAR T cells, with other approaches. And I think it's important to discuss and to see ethics not only as barrier, but kind of debating about the corridors that kind of safeguard translation and also speed it up if we can gain the trust of society and do that very deliberately.
Thank you.
My name is Otmar Wiestler. I'm the president of the Helmholtz Association, a major German research organization of which the DKFZ is one of 18 members. I also had the pleasure to serve as CEO of the DKFZ for 11 years, between 2004 and 2015. I'm here for a number of reasons. First of all, I'm excited about spectacular developments in the biomedical field, and cell and gene therapy is certainly one of the particularly promising areas. Second reason is it's always nice to be back in the Heidelberg environment, because this has been and is a stimulating sort of place. But the most important reason is the longer I am in business, the more I feel research and development at the end of the day is about creative young people, talented young scientists. And I'm very much looking forward to spend an hour or two with a very motivated crowd of young people. I should also point out I have a medical background myself. In my previous life, my research domain was brain tumors.
Thank you. Paula.
Hello everyone. So my name is Paula van Hennik, and you may think when you hear me talking that I am not from Germany. That's true. I'm from the Netherlands. I work at a global company, Pro Pharma, as a global consultancy for now 2.5 years. But before that, I worked for 11 years at the Dutch regulator, the Medicines Evaluation Board. Initially as a clinical assessor, and later on as one of the 2 Dutch representatives in the European Committee dealing with deciding on marketing authorizations for the European market for all types of products, including cell and gene therapies. And before that, I worked as a scientist, initially as a postdoc, and later as a group leader, and doing very fundamental biology work, namely molecular mechanisms of cell migration. And it built on my PhD in hematology. And before that, I even studied medicine. Although I'm not a doctor, I liked science better. So, and I'm here today because I also like to be around young people. I just find those discussions always very stimulating, but I also think that I can bring something here, and that is really talk about drug development in a very exciting field and how to speed it up, because like Leonard said, it is taking a long time, and I do think that a very well-planned development and also a multidisciplinary approach would facilitate that, and I can speak to the details later. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm the last one. My name is Mirco Friedrich. I'm a junior research group leader at the DKFZ as well. My group is researching synthetic immunology and also gene editing. I'm also a practicing oncologist, hematologist here at the Heidelberg University Hospital. So cell and gene therapy, let's say cell therapy, not so much gene therapy right now, is something that I see and I talk to patients about every day. Before that, I was actually recruited from MIT to DKFZ, and I work with Fang Zhang, who's one of the main genome editing pioneers, I would say, in the world. And maybe it's a American political situation that drove me into this, but also I feel like it's a little bit of patriotism when it comes to being a German and a European, that I now want to bring all of the cell and gene editing technologies, but also the stuff into patients here in Europe, where I'm also allowed to practice. And why am I here? It's because Otmar Wiestler just said that I hope that by the end of this, 80% of you will want to do cell and gene therapy afterwards in your research or in your medical practice. In my earlier life, I also studied medicine, but I found that science was cooler, so now my science is probably taking up 80% of the time. But it's those people that are sitting here right now that are actually driving the next steps, and cell and gene therapy, especially in Germany, is an incredibly young and currently unorganized field, and where there's unorganization and disorganization, there's also potential to establish yourself and to grow and to push boundaries. So yeah, this is what I want to convince you today about.
That was the marketing part.
Thank you for the introduction. I think we're in for a treat tonight. And I think we should jump right ahead to the first question. To begin, I'd love to understand where our academic innovation ecosystem most critically fails. Europe excels at foundational research. I mean, we're in Heidelberg, and you are the best example that we do good research. However, we struggle to bring those discoveries into therapies that reach the patient. For instance, in academia, if you do a PhD, the PhD is awarded for novel fundamental research, but translation often depends on these small, minute details, these reiterations, and long-term investments into a single idea. Work that doesn't always make for a flashy publication. My question to the panel tonight is, what are changes we can make to the research landscape, whether in funding, policy, or collaboration, that could best mend this link between discovery and translation? And to start it off, Otmar, you are a pioneer of program-oriented funding that allocates huge amounts of resources, center-spanning research programs aimed at solving grand challenges. How can this model mend the broken link between discovery and translation?
Well, first of all, you know, when you talk about a field such as cell and gene therapy, you should always be aware this is a rather complicated area, number one. So it's quite natural that it requires a lot of effort, a lot of talent to sort of, first of all, identify exciting, interesting new ideas and approaches. And when you follow the development over the years, I agree, I think we are quite successful in Germany and Europe by now to identify some such approaches, to develop interesting sort of leads. The DKFZ is a wonderful example for that in the cancer domain. It is also true that compared to some other sort of nations, the United States, Israel in particular, also China, we have certain problems of translating exciting new findings from research into more applied sort of stages. And this has, in my view, a number of reasons. The first reason is that when you compare the situation here with the situation in the US, many of the exciting new developments are usually driven by startup companies, often established by the scientists themselves, who have made an exciting sort of discovery and feel the ambition, this must be transferred into potential sort of new molecules, procedures, and innovations in medicine. And a fundamental difference we still have between Europe, Germany in particular, and Israel, United States, or China, we still lack a significant sort of financial source for startups. I think we are quite successful to support early stages when young people just start their own business or companies, but when it comes to scaling up, and we talk about an area which requires a lot of investment, when you talk about gene therapy or cell therapy, we lack a major source of funding, which is usually venture capital in the United States or in Israel. This is an issue which requires activity on the side of investors, but it's also a political issue. There's a number of legal problems, tax sort of issues, but that is number one. Despite extensive efforts over many years, we still have not established a culture of venture capital here. There's new ideas with the new government, which is very ambitious. One of the ideas is that eventually we may have to change to a system where investors and a government join forces. That is, everybody contributes. That has been very successful during the coronavirus epidemic with the BioNTech example, but unfortunately we stopped. That's one issue. Another problem we have in Germany, in my view, is when we accept for a moment that we lack a very strong, active and successful biotech sort of domain, we must find new ways to strategically cooperate between research centers on one hand and biomedical industry on the other. Some of the older people here know that we have gone through quite some efforts. I think the Bayer company even had a lab at the NCT at some point. But that idea of joining forces between a cancer research center and one of the major companies in developing the next generation of gene therapy, antibodies, small molecules, is still in its infancy. And then there is a third aspect, and this is very important for you, the audience here. When I visit Israel, what I do quite often, or the United States, and talk to young people, there is much more courage and commitment to take risks. So if you have an exciting new result as a PhD student or a young postdoctoral fellow, just go for it and pick it up. And this is why I believe we also must invest much more into the brains of young people. I'm absolutely sure there is young people in Germany who have a certain entrepreneurial DNA, but it's often hidden. And it's not encouraged enough to take risk, to try. And if you fail, try again. That's another problem of our culture. We are very much afraid of failing. And if you have failed once, you are always afraid that this is it. In the US or in Israel, it's quite the opposite. The more you have failed, the more interesting you are. Because in a way, it proves, that you are courageous. You have no problem taking risks. And I think it's a combination of all three. So we must try again to establish a solid basis for startup financing in this country. We must find new ways to promote cooperations between research on one hand and the industry sector on the other. And the third one is education of the next generation to take risks.
Thank you so much. I think you spoke on a very important topic, that's young risk takers. And I think we have a perfect example there today. That's you, Mirco. You are a strong advocate for pushing research into first-in-human studies. From your experience, how can you motivate young people like yourself? You're still very young, and therefore, I would say, please tell us how did you get into the field? Why are you now a group leader and a pioneer when it comes to immune engineering?
I just turned 30, so I actually feel quite old right now. But yeah, you're absolutely right, and I want to pick up something first before I answer your actual question. That Otmar has said, and that's Germans are very risk averse, and that is true for German startup culture. That's also true for German academia. That's also true for German students who the worst thing I could have done to my grandma is to fail my medical studies, and nowadays I don't even know why I haven't studied something else, right? Is my medical studies even appropriate to what I'm doing right now? Wouldn't I have gotten a better education doing science to begin with, right? But Germans are very risk averse, and there's something that sums it up quite nicely, and this is true especially for something that sounds very risky, like cell and gene therapy. It's something that Itai Yanai has said to me. Does anyone know Itai Yanai? He's a professor somewhere in New York, one of the New York universities, and he's known on Twitter for the whole like night science thing. When I talked to him, he said there's a difference between, and he's Israeli too, and a professor in the US, and he said there's something different between Israeli and German scientists, and US scientists he counts with the Israelis, and he says the Americans and the Israelis, they show their scientific data, and someone else raises their hand and says, oh yes, this is awesome, and also can we do this? And if a German presents their data, they first start with the problems, and then they lead in with oh, I don't know if this is any good data, but we've done this and this and this to tackle the problems, and he says that Germans are always the no but scientists, which is sometimes good because you also need to kind of cover the over enthusiasm and the overselling of the Americans, but also it kind of goes into the same vein as this like risk averse character, and this is something that definitely doesn't have to change as a society. It's probably very hard to change this as a society, but it definitely has to change in the areas that Otmar has just mentioned, which is early clinical translation for one, because we are still, if we would be double as risky in Germany, I would say we're still better regulated and more safe than 90% of the countries in the world that try this. And that's also true for startups and early phase startups. And those go hand in hand. When it comes to translation, okay, now, I mean, first of all, what I've learned is that if you don't want to do basic science, if you want to do something that goes into the patient, every PhD project and every project idea that you think about has to be thought translational from the get-go. And this is something I learned in a very hard way, because I will be talking a lot about this like one clinical trial that we're running, which is great, but it's also not that much experience, but it feels quite close to me because I'm confronted with the regulation every day now. But for this like one clinical trial, this is built on a scientific discovery, and we haven't thought about that this would become a clinical trial at some point. We were just curious about a mechanism in immunology, and if you don't think about the translation from the get-go, and you also, and this is the second point that I want to make later, you also don't speak the language of the regulators and of the production manufacturing process, you end up doing sciencey experiments that are great for paper, that are great to discover new things, but you lack the data and you lack the thought process that goes into translating this. So we basically had this great paper, and then we realized that all the data that we've generated for the Paul-Ehrlich Institute, which is something that we're probably mentioning quite often now, which is the highest authority in Germany right now to kind of talk about and regulate these cell and gene therapies, ATMPs they're called, together with every state's regulatory institutions. They are completely useless for the PI. They need a completely different way to do experiments, to perform experiments, to generate this data. And so translation must be embedded from the start on if you want to do this. And so I've just hired 3 PhD students, and they're all great. And I asked all 3 of them, do you want to do something that goes into patients, or do you want to do something that's great for science and we can publish quite well? Because then we have to structure the whole process differently. Otherwise, your therapy will only live in a mouse if you have that, and then it stops. And this brings me to my second point, which is you need scientists that are bilingual. I'm very bad at this. I don't speak any of the startup-y language, of the regulators' language, of the economical language. When someone asks me what the market value of our product is right now that we're pushing into phase 1 trial, I say, I don't know. How should I know? 100 million euros, 2 euros, this is not something that I've learned, and this is true for all the scientists. So the one thing that I can really encourage is that we need a generation of students, but also of PhD students, of young researchers that are kind of bilingual, and that they speak science and also this whole like manufacturability when it comes about cell and gene therapy, that speak regulation, because I don't speak it, I have to learn it. I have to learn it now. It's very hard. That comes with becoming 30. You don't speak new languages quite well. And if you learn this as a baby master student, maybe you become fluent in 2 languages. And this is kind of the thing. There is a lack of communication, and I think this is also one of the main reasons why there is this gap in translation. There are scientists, then there's something in between, which at the DKFZ is called innovation management, where there's patent lawyers and people that are there to advise you when it comes to the market and the product and so on. And then there's the regulators. And then at some point you have the hospitals and the physicians as well that you have to talk to, that again speak a completely different language. And then you have the patients, right? And we're probably coming to the patient part as well. But first of all, we need the patients a bit earlier. Because we also cannot not consider those voices from the get-go, but also all of these people that talk with each other on this whole process of getting this even into a first-in-human therapy, they all come from different backgrounds, and there's a lot of lack of communication, and a lot of people are lost in that translation. And I think this is one of the main reasons. And And the last example that I want to make now, before I take up too much talking time, is again to the point of Otmar. It starts also with the whole entrepreneurial spirit and the way that Americans see this in science as well. And I hope to not advertise America too much, but this is just something that I've been exposed to for the past couple of years. In Fang's lab, there is a patent lawyer that sits in every lab meeting, and after the lab meeting, if the data looked at all good, even if it's shitty data but a cool idea, the patent lady comes to you and says, "Come with me, clear your afternoon." And then I was dragged at some point into a room full of hired patent lawyers from an external company, and I had to do the whole lab meeting again. 3 days later, they threw the whole 200-page patent application on my desk and were like, please check if the data makes sense and if what we said about this is true. And I was amazed by how these patent attorneys, that obviously are biology trained as well to some degree, how well they understood the science just from my slides. And they wrote the whole thing in 3 days and were basically just like, sign here. And they do this with every invention that potentially comes out of the lab. Versus in Germany, and this is not only true for DKFZ, I think DKFZ has gotten much better at this, and we're now also IPing and like patenting a lot of things, but very much true for the universities. You basically have to convince them to spend maybe a couple of €1,000 to maybe write a patent application, and then let's see where it goes. And you have to do all the grunt work yourself. And that already is the first step of where an innovation can die. Because if there's no one there to support you, I'm not a lawyer, and that comes again to the translation question. I cannot write a patent application. I can tell the lawyers what we found, and then they have to write it. One other thing that we then regretted was that in this phase 1 trial that I'm talking about, there's a patent behind it. In that patent, there's a list of 10 guide RNA sequences that we use to genetically modify the CAR T cells for better persistence, and that's the whole trial. And there's a main table in the patent, and there's a supplement table in the patent. No one told me that the main table and the supplement table are 2 different things when it comes to the protection of the IP. And then we found out, when we're now translating this into patients, that you have to be very sure that your guide RNA of interest doesn't come with a whole lot of off-target effects, right? So that it's targeting something outside of your gene of interest and just making crazy things in the genome. Turns out that that guide RNA 11, which was just made it to the supplementary based on the paper, was the best one. So now we have a problem. Now we have patented something where the main invention or the main finding is basically not as protected as the rest. It's basically, unusable. And so now we have to go into this whole process again. And again, in the US, they're way faster. They just throw the money at it, and they hope that they patent in Fang's lab 10 things, and one of them will probably maybe be the new Cas9, and then they can, amortize all the rest. They can just get that revenue and take that back. And I think this is something that we need in German academic institutions as well. A bit more of risk-taking, but also a bit more of putting your money where your mouth is.
Thank you for that. I think if there's anybody who is bilingual in the room, that's you, Paula. You're a strong advocate for early regulatory thinking, and I'd love to hear your input.
Well, actually, it looks like the gentleman to my left and right looked at my notes, because it's very similar to what I was saying, because I really think that indeed planning starts very early. It starts with you in the lab and talking to your supervisor about your data, and thinking not only about how the data would look in your publication, but also what they could mean for the patients, in a longer term. And what the longer term is exactly is the question, but starts very early with you. I also very much think that the universities should create an environment, a supportive environment for developing the entrepreneurship way of thinking with these new students, because I also see it that people are not the same, but and there are many scientists, but the scientists often have more than one interest. So one of you may be more interested in the money, and the other may be more interested in the communication or the marketing or in the regulatory affairs, which I didn't know when I was a scientist. I was apparently also interested in. So it is also, you have to be exposed to it in order to know it. But I think that the environment, creating the environment at the universities to support that, so for instance, by organizing entrepreneurship courses is very important. I see that this in the Netherlands, for instance, at the Leiden University Medical Center in Amsterdam as well. They're just hubs, so to say. And the interesting suggestion, the point that you raised, Otmar, with regard to big companies also being close to the universities and the results, the science hubs. I mean, you see that in the UK, and I think that's where just putting people together in a small area makes things work. I think that's what I see at least happening. And I agree with you. You should be able to speak the language of the other disciplines, but you also should be realizing that you should not need to do it all by yourself, because you cannot master it all. You need other people. So organizing a critical mass around you is in the end also very important. Thank you.
Thank you. I think to sum that up, it's very, very important to set up support networks in universities that invest into students and invest into startups and invest into regulatory thinking. And we here today with High Innovation, who've organized the venue, specifically the Startup Hub, and their whole organization is working on exactly that, creating a startup hub in Heidelberg to promote translation. So I appreciate that we can be here tonight. Going towards the next question. Let's say your therapy has succeeded in various clinical trials and has gotten market approval by the European Medicines Agency. Now we come to pricing and reimbursement discussions. And that's where many, many therapies fail. And one of the main reasons for this failure is the very high price tags of many of these cell and gene therapies. And on our panel tonight, we have various different peoples and various different perspectives on this exact issue. We have an industry representative, that's you, Paula, who must ensure that companies can continue to innovate, and that means profitability. We have a patient advocate who quite rightly fights for the best possible care for the lowest possible price, so the best access. And then we have scientists who are driven to create the most efficient and effective therapy possible. And an ethicist, that's you, who can highlight the profound societal considerations of how we value and how we pay for these treatments. And my question to you, which I think is on many people's minds today, is do these therapies actually have to be this expensive? Is this a phenomenon of how we innovate, how we manufacture, how we do the funding and financing, or is this just simply the cost of groundbreaking science? I'd love to open this question up to the panel. Does anybody want to comment on this?
Well, I can start. I don't think the prices should need to be that high. But I also think that there are several reasons why they are as high as they are currently. And that I think one of them is that we are still very much in learning about cell and gene therapy. You need a lot of work in order to develop one of them. You need very skilled people to do so. Consumables are very expensive. So it takes also a lot of time to develop them, and that all adds to the costs, I think. I'm just also checking secretly my notes, because I prepared this, of course. But I also, the other thing is that cell and gene therapies are often developed for a very small market, so for orphan diseases. So your target population is small, that also leads to a low requests, so to say, and therefore higher prices. Of course, if you expand the target population over the course of time, so you gather further indications to your label, then also the target population increases, and that can bring your price down. But also, the patent duration is 20 years, right? And you need to finish everything before that, still have some money to start developing other products as well. So that, in view of that limited time, that also impacts the pricing a lot, I think. But I would say, give us some time. I think if you look at the first biotech products 25 years ago, they were also very expensive, while now their prices have decreased because, for instance, target population, but also manufacturing has scaled up, so to say, and has become more efficient. So, for that.
That's great, thank you.
I would maybe continue on that. I think, as you showed in one of the last slides, there are only about 20 approved gene and cell therapies in Germany at the moment, and you have to approve it by EMA, by Paul-Ehrlich Institute, whatever. And I think you have to really consider that we are having limited resources from the regulatory side, but also from the financial side, to get funding to do that and so on. And as I'm a cancer survivor myself, I was diagnosed with a central nervous tumor in my early teens, and they had to perform radiotherapy, they had to perform a lot of surgeries. It was a pain. But in the end, my prognosis was quite well. Would I have wished for cell or gene therapy to spare me of all that stuff? Of course. But am I really representing a group of patients with high needs for that kind of therapy? I'm not quite sure about that. So I think you really have to think about where we put our limited resources in. There are diseases with poor prognosis, there are diseases for children, for example, glioma or midline gliomas or sarcomas or stuff like that, with really poor prognosis, poor quality of life after treating them either. So I think you really should center the preclinical but also the translational efforts to target patients and entity groups who really need them, and not only do models because you have an elegant model and it's a nice mouse model or something, but really look into unmet needs in the patient population and rather do patient-driven than patient-centric research, kind of.
And I'm would be interested, so whether the high cost for the all the innovations have been expensive, absolutely right, and then the price has gone down. But for the gene therapy, like for SMA, that's the highest, I think, possible price for one syringe. 1.9 million, I think, was the initial price. I don't know whether it had been going down now since the last 3 years. I think, especially since these are rare diseases, and I can understand the argument, they are also genetic diseases. So if if it comes to worse, then one insurance company has a family of 3 or 4 that they need to kind of cover. So these are kind of millions of euros then. And I think the pricing argument that I read was not only we have to cover for all the other developments that fail over 20 years, these are the arguments that are quite familiar was that is so effective. You need only this one syringe to save, because this is a disease for newborns or very little children. You can save 80 years of quality adjusted life. So that makes, compared to other treatments we need to continue over the time of a lifespan. That's just what we invest normally in a healthcare system. And although this argument makes a lot of sense, it still is for one person an enormous amount, and I can't imagine that this covers the cost of development. So I think we need to be quite transparent what actually are the numbers behind it, also to then enter into a discussion with societies, where do we want to spend the money, because as we see in other fields of society, if it's defense or if it's infrastructure, the healthcare budget will not grow, it will stay the same or shrink. So we will have a prioritization and even rationing discussion that is kind of unavoidable, I think. So it would be good to be transparent about the numbers behind it.
Well, I think we have to be realistic on this issue. Number one, it is extremely expensive to develop high-level therapies. And gene and cell therapy is certainly no different in that respect. And at some point, this money has to be recovered. I think that's economically fair, and that's the business model at the end of the day, number one. And number two, I think there's differences between these therapies. I think what Eva Winkler just mentioned is an interesting example. When you consider something like SMA, this could be, it has not been proven yet, this could be really groundbreaking. A treatment, you know, for a group of children who had no hope whatsoever, which may help them to lead a rather normal life. Again, this has not been proven yet. I think we need to have more time to follow up on these children. And if that is true, personally, I believe an investment of €1 million or so is justified. In the case of SMA, also, you know, when these treatments advance, when the number of patients increase to a certain extent, when some of the money has been recovered by the company, even those prices will go down, there's no doubt. It's entirely different in the case of cell therapies, where we talk about large groups of patients. There's a lot of hope for many cancer patients that they will benefit from CAR T-cell sort of therapies, and I think that hope is not unrealistic. Again, the development is expensive. It's a rather complicated treatment. It's not a simple drug which you can buy in a pharmacy. But again, you know, if efficacy is being proven, in the case of CAR T, I'm absolutely certain prices will go down dramatically over the years. If the treatment is really efficient and if we can personalize it, which is quite likely. And the same, by the way, in my view, will apply to other therapies. I mean, there's for a long time, cell therapies have been, well, basically hematopoietic. Hematopoietic stem cell transplantation has been around for 30 years or so, quite successful. But the picture is changing now, of course, because now we have these stem cell-based preparations of donor cells as very encouraging results for Parkinson's patients, for instance, from this Blue Rock, New York company, and there's others following. And again, you know, if this is really efficient, it's probably worth the investment at the end of the day. This, by the way, is not exceptional. I mean, when you compare some of the expensive cancer treatments, we have had antibodies and small molecule treatments which were also in the hundred thousands for an individual patient. And don't underestimate the power of the market. Once these things are efficient, you know, once they can spread to different patient populations, prices will go down. By the way, that's one of the many, many important tasks for patient advocates, to point that out over and over again. And the final aspect is we should also keep in mind, we often talk about diseases for which there's basically no alternative treatment at this point. It certainly applies to many of these genetic disorders. It applies to many of the cancer patients at the end of the day. And I would say that the same holds for Parkinson's as well. We should have an economist here in our group, because, you know, it would be interesting to sort of specifically look into some of the figures. What maximum burden do we talk about? How much do we spend for the healthcare system as a whole? What would be required, you know, to apply this treatment to patients in Germany? That would facilitate the discussion a little bit. But I would warn to sort of put too much weight on this argument of pricing. As long the treatment is really efficient. I mean, there should expectation management is also very important. Yeah, that's why I voice a word of caution for the SMA cases. It's not really clear if these children have a long-term perspective. If they have, then I personally would be prepared to invest quite a bit.
Yeah, maybe I finished the round and say that for once, I mean, as long as we're talking about cell and gene therapy, we need to consider that we're not, for the first time, mass manufacturing pills or molecules or antibodies. We are changing the biology of living cells that at the moment, for most cases, have to come from a specific human individual and go back to that specific human individual. And that is probably one of the points that drives these prices so much. And for some of these things, not for the whole healthcare system by any means, but for some of these things, I know the figures. We have to enter a real societal dialogue that cannot just be done once, but continuously. Because right now, example CAR T-cell therapy, two or three CAR T-cell therapies approved in Germany right now for lymphoma and for multiple myeloma, two blood cancers. And the costs for one of them that we charge the health insurance for each patient are about 150,000 euros. Most of these patients, and I think we have to be transparent with that, they see this, and this is at the point where the disease is, as you mentioned, otherwise not curable anymore. The alternative would be palliative care in that regard. And currently there are studies going on that pull these CAR T cells into earlier phases, and maybe that's then different. But in the case that we're applying it right now, we're spending 150,000 euros. Most of these patients, the CARs will circulate and fight the tumor for 3 months, and then they're gone. And then in most of these patients, after 6 months, there's another relapse, and then we're back at square one, and they have to either go to palliative care or do something crazy with them, like an autologous stem cell transplant another time. That, again, as you said, was invented in the 90s and is still one of the earliest probably cell therapies, very effective, actually quite cheap nowadays. And so we have to enter this dialogue to also, what we're doing on a daily basis, also discuss with the patients, not with the price tag, but with setting the expectations of what this therapy might mean for them. And then we have to talk about this as a society, because right now these things are not as effective in over the broad set of patients. However, there are some patients, and those are the long-term data we're asking for. The first patients that have been treated at NIH back then, now 10 to 12 years ago by Steven Rosenberg and his group, basically CAR pioneers, the ones where the CARs for some reason persisted over 10 years, they were tumor-free at that stage. Because they were the first patients, so they were the last resort patients that were treated, they were still tumor-free right now. So these are the ones that really benefit from this, and this is really a breakthrough. But we have to predict who will likely benefit to make this bearable for the healthcare system. Because right now these are all in diseases, except for the SMA, for example. Cell therapies are all in diseases that affect very old people. The population gets older as we speak, and the blood cancers are just affecting a lot of the elderly. And we have to be better about selecting the ones that really benefit from it, also to do no harm to the ones that don't benefit. And this another point of transparency is that these therapies are also quite toxic, because imagine you have a dysregulated immune system. That's called a disease. That's most of the times, for example, inflammatory bowel disease, multiple sclerosis, and this can be as often common side effect from your cell therapy. So these come also with very high risks. So we have to just get better to select the ones that with okay risk can really benefit the most. And then I think that the pricing question will be a bit better at hand. And I hope that a lot of the research that is being done right now, actually also pioneered from Germany, from Munich in that case, is to predict which patients benefit most from CAR T cells or from bispecific antibodies and all of these expensive diseases before they even get the treatment.
But these are technical issues.
Yeah.
That's why I said efficacy is very important here.
Those are technical issues. There's another point that drives these prices up, which is the manufacturing. And another number for that is, again, this phase 1 trial is a combination of CRISPR and CAR T cells, right? And Cas9 as a protein is very hard to make and to produce, and the yields are very low. But still, it's if you get enough Cas9 to treat all of the sadly 12 patients that we can afford to treat in this phase 1 trial, to make these gene-edited cell therapies, it would be probably 100,000 euros for all of them. If you now slap the tag of a CGMP grade Cas9 on it, which is currently, interestingly enough, by the producer, the same facility, they just have to do more quality control and apply to more regulations, then suddenly, from a 5 million trial budget that comes from the taxpayer, which is an incredible amount to pay for 12 patients for something that we don't even know works, but for which I obviously always argue that we have to try it, 3 million of those 5 million go just into the Cas9 protein. That's just, the raw reagent that we put in. That's not funding the research behind it. That's not funding the translation. That's not funding the whole thing of getting this approved, and the study nurses and the doctors and everyone who's participating. The patient advocates, 3 of them, we are also, reimbursing for helping us develop the protocol. Nothing from that is paid. It's 3 million euros that we pay to an American company, and the delta is 2.9 million euros to use another label. And I think this is something where we have to get better as well as a society. And this speaks to the regulation, but that's not something that is just Europe intrinsic. This is in the US as well.
Yeah, so those are the CMC requirements, right, that are put out there. And I think they are there for a reason, right, to ensure the quality of your product and the consistency of your product over time. So this is often an argument that I hear, that the CMC requirements are too strict, right, and make the product too expensive.
And they are too expensive.
Well, yeah. But then if you think about the alternative, right? I mean, the alternative is the discussion that if you would tamper with that or change that, and there would happen something in terms of with the patient for safety, there will be severe adverse events, then the finger pointing will be in that respect, right? So there, I think it is a communication, I think, and involvement of patients and the public about what what do they want, right? What they want to see is very important. You cannot just change those kind of things without having a proper discussion.
Oh, sure. But then again, imagine this would be now 10 times less regulated and therefore 10 times more cheap. And we could put this not in 12 patients, but we could actually learn something from this using the same taxpayer money and put it in 50 patients. And yes, maybe one of these patients might get a side effect from an impurity in the Cas9, which we don't know. But that being said, I would say the finger pointing is always at the treating physician. And at the very last stage, the producing company.
Or at the regulator also, I mean, yeah.
Well, I think the regulation has been more stringent after the first cases, right? The first cases in the 90s with Chelsea Gelsinger case, a young boy who had an OTC, I think, gene therapy, and died, and that triggered the whole, no, we have to make it really super safe. So I think it was only one case, but then, and we see that in other societal discussions as well. If we could look at green gene technology that has been completely stopped in a way, or kind of barked in Europe, there are kind of fields burned now for the researchers trying to get this forward. So you really, it needs a dialogue. That's, I think, the main point, and to be aware that people are sometimes risk averse or risk seeking, and that this is heterogeneous. So I don't say that you always have to orient upon those who are most risk averse, but it needs some trust that this is as safe as it's safe enough.
Safe enough.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. But I have two things to add, right? Because I mean, when you're developing cell gene therapy, you're doing it for in principle for a particular group of patients. However, I think, and then I refer back to one of my first comments is about thinking ahead. Is if you can make your production facility as such that it can also be used for other products, so like developing a platform technology, right?
Don't get me started on
Okay,
this. This is the worst regulation ever, and this is particularly painful in Baden-Württemberg, where we're not allowed to do 2 different cell therapies in the same room that has been cleared to make cell therapies. So if there's 2 patients that require 2 different cell therapies, we cannot make them because they would coincide.
That's very interesting. So where's the rate limiting factor? Is that local, or is that the European? At the European level?
I guess it's always the European guidelines define local regulations, but there is definitely a difference between the states in Germany at this particular regard. Yes. So in Nordrhein-Westfalen or Nordrhein-Palatinate, I would say, the regulations are completely different. So the biggest cell and gene therapy producer right now in the world is a German company. It's Miltenyi Biotech. They're the market leader also for making all of the machines that everyone uses. In their facility, it's under NRW law, they can produce 50 different things in 50 different devices at the same time, which incredibly lowers costs for them, but also they're the main manufacturer of the plasticware and of the reagents, so it even more lowers costs for them. And in our academic facility, where we have to again spend taxpayer money to make these cell therapies one at a time, we have limited space, we have limited personnel, obviously, and we have 2 of these machines. But again, we cannot, because we're in Baden-Württemberg, cannot make 2 different cell and gene therapies at the same time in the same room. We have to put the machine physically in another room, which would then needs to be licensed for like 5 years and costs another couple of million euros to get licensed, just because there is this random one law that's
interesting, but it seems to be like a local issue.
German bureaucracy.
German bureaucracy at its best.
Yeah, well, I would not go that far, being a foreigner here, but but you do have, like those several Galapagos assets, right? So that you have like very miniature cell factories, right? Where you can, So even that would not be allowed.
Even that would not be allowed because the gene-modified products
Yes.
are not allowed to mix in the same room under any circumstances.
Oh, that's
So
interesting.
even if they fly from one device to another, that's already the possibility that this is not allowed,
That's
at least in our facility in Baden-Württemberg.
That's interesting.
And there's a third point that I think drives costs, and that's and this is something that we can actually all tackle in an academic system in Germany, because this is completely not industry driven. Is right now there's a lot of hype in cell and gene therapy, which is why we're all probably sitting here, and also a lot of hype in cell and gene therapy when it comes to autoimmune diseases. There are national strategies in place that are being discussed on highest political levels, and I believe this is going to get better at some point. But right now, the aforementioned production facilities that we're talking about, every single university hospital and every single research institute is either building their own or try to at least get access to a local one. But there's currently no initiative to just make a centralized one for Germany, which would reduce costs for a number of reasons. Imagine we're all baking bread, is what we're making these cells with, and everyone doesn't have an oven yet, but they know the Americans make bread, we have to make bread, and German bread is the best. And now every single person has to buy their own oven, but they cannot just use the oven, they have to get a license, and it takes 10 years and sinks a lot of money. And this is what's happening in the cell therapy space right now. All the universities, all the medical centers, all the research institutions, they try to build up their own little GMP facilities that need to get through thorough licensing. It's crazy the amount. I would never want to do that job to get such a facility licensed right now. And this is just to get the rooms licensed. And then you have to get your cell and gene therapy license as well. So this goes beyond your own career. You're basically building pyramids. Because the next ones have to get the actual cell therapy going. So one idea of this German national strategy is to have these let's call it a bakery, like a centralized bakery with a lot of ovens, and ideally taxpayer funded, so we can at least push a little bit of the prices, and then get all of these cell and gene therapies manufactured centrally, and just get licensed once and then just ship them to the hospitals. But that's also not only a problem, obviously, of regulation, but actually that's also coming down to political, aspects at the universities.
It's not political at all. That's a problem of your community.
It's a problem of egos. I wanted to say the next.
If you guys would agree, I mean, I oversee a rather large organization. And in our organization, we have a community of physicists who build very expensive ovens, often in the order of 3-4 billion euros. 5 billion, the FAIR facility in Darmstadt, close by. And what I admire about the physicists is they have developed a common sense. We can only realize such a project when we all agree this one should be in Darmstadt. And the next one in Marseille.
Yeah.
And the third one, God knows where. And this is something we should sort of consider in the medical domain as well.
That's a mindset.
This is an example, but it must be community driven. I think this cannot come from politics.
It's a mindset issue, and you're right. I mean, with the physicists, it starts with the fact that at CERN there's one publication that takes 10 years. There's 120 people on that publication, and it's in alphabetical order, and everyone is happy about it.
Sometimes
and
800.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
so why don't you start an initiative like that and start in Baden-Württemberg? If the 5 medical centers in Baden-Württemberg would agree, we join forces, we establish one high-level facility for cell production.
Yeah. We cannot even agree in Heidelberg.
I'm afraid.
And you probably know that as well as I do.
But you see the problem.
That's the problem. It's a problem. It's a problem of
really
egos.
a
I
task
think. Yeah.
for our community.
And there's one good example from the medical, or at least medical adjacent field, and that's the Human Genome Project. That also spent a lot of money and was a huge collaboration.
But that was an American project.
Still a good example, and there were a lot of people contributing to it, and now we have the first human genome sequence. And by the way, coming back to costs, that cost for the Human Genome Project was crazy, and now we're sequencing a full human genome for not even €1,000. So that costs have gone down for 10 years, within 10 years, and this was academically driven. But yeah, the physicists are ahead of us in that regard. But I think it's also a matter of who's heading these facilities and how collaborative are they in Germany, and how is this like collaborative spirit also overshadowed by competitive spirit between the
Wonderful
hospitals.
task for the next generation
Yeah.
of yours.
Thank you for that very lively discussion. I think a phrase that came up in this conversation quite a bit is patient partnership. And with you here today, and I think I speak for many, that I want to know, what does it mean to incorporate patients into the research and development process, into the regulation, into the financing of these cell and gene therapies? And what do you do in your day-to-day?
Well, I really like the metaphor of Mirco saying that you have to be bilingual, and I think if you are a physician and a scientist in medicine, you have to be trilingual, because you have to talk patient too, because it's really important that we are doing this for the patients and not only for our models or something. And one example of that would be, we just discussed about efficiency a lot, and we had the example of CAR T cells, for example. This is a really desperate situation for the patients. They had a lot of therapies yet, and they are dying, quite honestly. So they get this CAR T cell therapy. When can we say that this is an efficient therapy? Is there a marker for efficacy? And there is none. For example, there was in the ASCO one study that 20% of the patients who get with myeloma, who get CAR T cells after their high dose chemotherapy or whatever, develop a secondary cancer in the next 1.5 years, or 2.5 years, I think it was. So was that really efficient? And I think these are questions that patient involvement in research has to tackle. I think it's all about involvement, education, and communication, what patient involvement really brings to the community. First of all, we have to be involved in every part of research. There's preclinical research, there's clinical research with phase 2, phase 3 studies for new medicine, for new therapies, and then there's care as well. And we have to be integrated in every part of that, because in the end, it's for us. Then there's education. You have to have partners that can be included in every kind of work or study or research, because everything is kind of patient-centered, because in the end the patient is where we measure the outcomes and who gets the stuff. And then there's then we in Heidelberg, for example, have the Peak Academy. We try to educate the patients who want to represent a broader group of patients with different entities, for example. And it's quite hard, because you have to see, if you have a patient, for example, with a certain disease, and he says or she says, hey, I want to be a representative for that entity. To be that educated, to help, and to understand everything, for example, here for the preclinical research, it's quite hard. So I think this is what patient involvement is all about. Communication, education, involvement. And I think these are 3 cornerstones, and in the end there are different groups building here. There's the DKFZ patient representation, there's NCT representation, there's representation in the children's oncology ongoing, and I think it will get a larger part in the coming research, for example in funding as well. There's no funding anymore without patient involvement in a larger scale, or at least it will be like that. So we are involved in every part of research, and we really try to strengthen our position in clinical research, preclinical research as well. I think that is our mission. That is kind of a pioneering process. As I said, we are more into clinical studies yet, but we try to get into that as well. Yes.
That's great, thank you.
And I may add, because we also cooperate on the patient involvement in research track, which is built up in the different NCT sites, that we are also kind of collecting all, very at the beginning, the kind of case stories where in the process it's what kind of involvement and questions helpful and changes also the research process. So, for example, we had interesting discussions. It was actually a brain tumor study on inclusion criteria, and the physicians or physician scientists were quite restrictive, saying, well, these patients are so sick, we don't want to give an extra burden on an uncertain, well, it's a phase 1-2 trial. And then the patient advocates were very outspoken to be more inclusive and just invest more on the informed consent, expectation management, explanation side, and open up the inclusion criteria in this respect. And I think that would be recruitment and explanation and kind of being in transmission, person or institution in a way between patients and the patient, so patient experts in the wider patient community. That is, I think, one of many strengths, but that is what you immediately experience. And I think there are also certain kinds of studies where you really, in my field of medical ethics, we have a lot of trials on decision making and developing decision aids, also in end-of-life decision situations where it's not a new target, but still something that can be done better or worse. So there, patient input is crucial to find the right language and inform it in a way that it's acceptable, and train the doctors, but also train in a way the patient to make up their minds and help in decision making to an earlier time point than when it's in far advanced cancer disease.
I think this is a real win-win situation, and we should have done this earlier in retrospect. I just want to add 2 or 3 more aspects. I think for the patients, it's also important in terms of expectation management. What can you realistically expect as somebody who is affected, who has gone through all the experience as a patient, and this applies in particular to experimental therapies. There is a lot of, let's say, questionable predictions out there, promises, and that is an important aspect for you. For us, I mean, you are extremely important advocates. I just mentioned 2 examples. The first one is, of course, promote access to clinical trials. You can make a very strong case with respect to regulatory issues, bureaucracy, which prevents you from having access to some of these new treatments. And another area which I believe will be more and more sort of virulent in the future is data access. Because we are living in an area where most of the biomedical fields will undergo dramatic changes based on new approaches which build on generative AI. And what you need for that is data access. We have a real problem in Germany with data protection as far as medical data are concerned. And I'm not arguing here that this is not sensitive data and it should not be properly taken care of. But considering the opportunities, the possibilities we will get for individualized medicine based on generative AI, we must find a proper solution for data access. The situation is such that usually, you know, patients are very strong advocates. They have no problem with data access because they have one genuine interest. They want to be healthy again. Our problem are healthy people. Who promote a very strong sort of data protection policy. Germany has a long tradition in that. You mentioned green biotechnology, that's another example. And we really must tackle this problem. If we don't, we have no chance to be competitive in this new era of digital health, which I find particularly exciting and promising. With you on our side, that problem can probably be solved.
And I think that's a great example because, for example, if you have some projects where there's a discussion about data and data protection, if there have been patients in this project from the beginning on, you can argue that if they communicate, for example, what the project was or what the results was and what patients agreed on and how they looked into the process, it's far more trustable for our community and the community in general than if, for example, some scientists sit in their room and do it for themselves somehow. And I think this is one of the great things that patient involvement can bring, just to communicate to a larger group of people, larger group of affected people, and create trust in these groups.
Lena, do you remember what I told the two of you about patient advocates yesterday?
Yeah.
Yeah. I called them, when they said patient advocates, I was like, oh, those are a pain in the ass. And that's true.
And I'm glad to be.
Yeah, and that's wonderful because in that regard, we have been forced by the NCT actually, because we're getting the funding for that trial by the NCT, to involve patient advocates. And to get the patient advocates was already a pain in the ass because most patients at the NCT have solid cancers and we had to go find people with a non-solid tumor that are kind of in that program. And they were so annoying. They sat down with us and they asked so many questions.
Great.
And I like talking, but I really like talking about these things. But we talked for 6 hours about all of these different aspects, and it started with CRISPR and it ended with cell therapy and all of the things that we're discussing right now. And at the end of the day, I think it made the trial, but also the study better and the trial protocol better. But also it gave us so much ammunition towards the regulators. And not even the regulators like the Panelists Institute, but also ammunition within the Heidelberg community to push this because they were so eager to let us do this and also to let us do this in more patients. So every time we have a budget discussion, I say, if you're not complying, I'm sending the patient advocates. There are 3 of them. They're really annoying. The trial obviously got a lot more expensive than we thought because again we're trying it for the first time now, and we're all learning on the process also with the patient advocates. And another trial from Freiburg was the first gene-edited cell therapy in Germany, and they were confronted with so much regulation that they pulled out again and they just stopped. And now we come as a second trial, and the Panelists Institute was already rolling their eyes. And I feel like we're trying to push this now, but it also makes so much more fun to also have the 3 patient advocates every time they're also in the rounds. I'm bringing them to the PI as well. They're incredible and annoying, these people, and I'm shaming them. It just motivates each other, and that's quite fun. And that's really cool. I think one of the things that we can think about in the future. And this is something that came to me yesterday when we spoke about this beforehand, was something that the NCT has, I think, pioneered in Germany, which is the tumor boards, where basically single patient cases are being discussed, and then we're trying to find a new therapy, or we're trying to find an alternative therapy, and then there's like 20 people at a table who are experts in their respective fields, and they try to brainstorm on this like one patient case. Maybe for the next trials or for the next target, we do it kind of in reverse, like a reverse tumor board, where the patients actually come in and there's a bunch of scientists and a bunch of physicians at the table. And for the first time, we're not trying to pick a target that's cool because it's cool to publish or like nice to have, or it sells very well in Nature, but some patient comes in with a problem and says, hey, find a solution for this problem, which is most of the times the disease, but sometimes a very specific aspect of the disease. Not the disease itself, but maybe a side effect, or like, I'm always thinking of polyneuropathy, which is incredibly painful and annoying, and I don't know how much research actually is going into PNP therapies. But if a patient now comes in and you have 20 scientists and physicians in the room, they come with this problem, they're all trying to outcompete each other with ideas. So maybe we should try something like a reverse tumor board, and that's something that I just wanted to give as an idea.
Yeah, but that's a great example because we are not only talking about longevity of life, which we promote with those therapies, but we are talking about quality of life. If you're surviving on some therapy, but your life is miserable afterwards because you have so many toxicities, long-term effects, whatever, is it really worth it to have that therapy in the end? And this is a great example. And what you said before is that kind of they were so annoying, but why have them been annoying? I think in the end, we as researchers, and I'm a researcher myself besides being a patient advocate, we are in a bubble somehow. And we are so much into doing this technical stuff that sometimes I think we forget why we do all that. And I'm sitting 8 hours in front of Excel tables or something, but the bigger picture, what the motivation and what the clinical implications of all that is what patient involvement can bring. And it's like a, as you said, as an annoying reminder all the time, please keep in mind that we are doing that for someone and not only doing that because we're earning money or whatever, fame because of that.
Can I add a little bit on what was said? Because I think that my experience is that the level of organization of patients groups, right, maybe further enhanced in order for them to have a bigger voice, a stronger voice in discussions with clinicians or with when they're asked by companies to participate in discussions with regulators. Because I think sometimes patients present themselves or patient groups present themselves as, it works for me, or it works for 3 others. I know 3 others who also benefited, while the decisions are made on a population base. And I think that if patients would organize them in larger groups, so to say, would be beneficial for the strength of their voice. And there's one other aspect. What I think that patient groups could also be very helpful is in discussion with the health technology assessment bodies. Because indeed, like what you just said, is that benefit of treatment is often measured and valued in the context of overall survival benefit, right, and particularly in cancer. While, of course, being able to go to school or to work or have your caregiver go to school or to work, right, is also a benefit. But how currently it's not measured, it's not factored in the health technology, the relative effectiveness models. And I think there's a lot of research required to make that translation, because there I think that the patient organization can be of great help.
I think it's almost all there. We just need to implement it. I've been on a European project, PREFER, that was from the Innovative Medicine Initiative, public-private partnership with three pharmaceutical companies and patient organizations to map where patients can give input throughout the life cycle of a product, it was called. And it was very interesting because they were just a little bit like your reverse tumor board patients in different kind of diseases. One was psoriasis on the board, say what should be the outcome, and Roche was asking what kind of product they want to have, and they were quite heterogeneous. There was one also risk averse and risk taking, but then there was also one group saying where the best possible treatment would be to be fine, to have no skin changes at all, and I would be willing to take the risk of a higher leukemia or cancer risk in 10 years from now. And then others were just the other way around. They say, well, I'm fine with a little bit of remnants on my skin, but then I don't want the leukemia risk. So it then would kind of end in 2 different products at least for the pharmaceutical company. But that was really an interesting discussion process, because it was quite differentiated then in the preferences. So they had preference kind of preference tools and measurements throughout the life cycle, and the patient organizations were international, right? Psoriasis organization not only in the EU but in different countries. So I think it's a high level of organization in many disease areas, not those with a dire prognosis. So lung cancer for a long time had no good patient representation. It changed now with some of the targets. Pancreatic cancer is still difficult to find. But I think we have a lot of tools. We just need to implement them on a regular basis and have this. And that is the efforts are now to find enough and teach and train patient experts, and then to think about it and change the culture of having them in every board that we decide about clinical studies and trials.
Can I ask, was the health technology assessment also part of that bigger project, right?
EMA was with it.
Yeah, EMA, but it's not health technology, right?
Yeah, but they had also so it was a large project, I think, with more than 50 partners.
Because I really think that, I mean, I'm involved in a project for a company. In this cannot share details, but there's the discussion is very lively. But indeed, there's a discrepancy between, you know, what the patient experiences as a benefit, what the regulator thinks is the benefit for the patient, and then how the health technology assessment body determines how much the benefit is worth, right? Which is also not based on the same endpoints, not necessarily, I should say, on the same endpoints relevant for the regulator or for the patient. So I think that should become more closer, because then I guess it will also impact in the end the price of the cell and gene therapies, because you put different types of values.
Better talk to each other.
Exactly.
I think one of the problems as well is that as a patient representative, no matter how big the group is, you always reflect your own standpoint in the end. And I'm just Julian promoting what I think is best for people with my disease, but there might be someone else with a completely different disease, a completely different outcome of the same disease. If you enlarge these groups, you could say, okay, you diversify the interests of the patients and what they say about it, but you could also say it creates more friction and more opinions that in the end you don't know what to do with that. So I think we really have to think about that in the end, because I'm just sitting here in some panels and talking about my experiences, yet there is no rationale on what I should say for my group or what I should promote for my group, and we need to learn that. I think with your groups we are trying to get to path new ways, for example, for promoting of what we can apply in studies. It's called toolkits, and that we have just something to work where everyone is educated the same and does the same thing, kind of. And I think this
that's exactly what I meant, right? In terms of enhance the organization, so that you establish a framework of thinking, right? That is relevant. Of course, you have individual experiences, but then you can apply that and use it to influence decision making. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, what you're describing is basically democracy, right? So if you have more patients and they're all just not stratified by their disease, but also stratified by their belief system and by their political ideas, right? You will get more opinions and it will become more heterogeneous. And then at that point, it's probably even better to have something like this, but you then have to just agree on a framework when it comes to majority voting.
But I don't know it's about voting. This should be part of individualized medicine at the end of the day. Include the expectations of an individual patient, what he or she would like to have. I think that's what it comes down to at the end of the day.
Would be individualized development of...
Based on good data and of course solid advice.
But then with your parliament example, we don't in our German parliament have 600 single people with 600 single opinions, but we have parties that agreed on some stuff, and in the end they reflect an opinion of the entire party most of the time. So I think this is a great example of what patient representation could look like in the end. Everyone has a little bit of a different opinion on some stuff, but the general opinion on the really important topics could be the same or nearly the same in the end.
It could be the same. It could also be enriched by, for example, I was just thinking about pancreatic cancer. It could be enriched by the relatives as well, right? Because they have gone, I mean, pancreatic cancer right now, there's no alternative, right? But they have gone most of the times with the patient through the whole process, and they have maybe also different opinions about this, looking at it as someone who hasn't had the disease and like from a retrospect. But that might also be a good alternative to have. But yeah, probably people have to also, kind of consolidate alliances when it comes to this. But that would require a very large body, right?
But this is a great example too for children's oncology patient involvement, because they are patients, but rather they are parents. and the opinion of the parents and the patients are so different that yet we are fighting all the time. There's no agreement on anything yet, and it's so hard to bring these groups together. So as you can see, including family gives exactly it could give opportunities, but could complicate it as well. It's with that like everything.
I think we can move on to the next question. I guess that, for example, in your group, the people that fund your projects are mostly not patients. It's the general public. It's the general public that doesn't really know what cell and gene therapies are, and it might cause or bring up hope, or it might bring up anxiety. We already discussed green gene editing, which in Germany is prohibited. We can also bring up germline editing, which right now is prohibited as well. And we should bring up the social dialogue of how we communicate cell and gene therapies, not to scientists like here in the room, but to the general public. That's also called design theory, of how you design a product so that it fits into the worldview of the people. And I'm interested in this proactive communication. So not only when the product is there, but in the whole process of research and development to the final product. Whoever wants to start.
Proactive and honest. Those are the two major aspects.
That's very fair.
Yeah, I think the design, so I'm not a design researcher, but we are working quite closely in some of the projects, because they come also from different healthcare systems. Many projects in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, where you don't have a healthcare system. So, but what everybody has is an iPhone, or at least a mobile phone. So you have all your. You need to go into the communities and learn how is this used, and how can information, for example, for pregnant women and hygiene or nutrition be disseminated to the women. And then they start with the villages and groups, how information can, and how they would use that, and what are cultural traditions that would prohibit or promote certain knowledge and products. And I think in a way we can learn a little bit from this research how new fields like synthetic biology, since we learned in other fields like the green gene technology that some wordings generate anxiety, and then they get their own dynamic, that we go into dialogue and say, what is synthetic always good? Sometimes people think synthetic is something that is out of control because it's not natural. So that is a natural versus synthetic. So asking these questions and looking for a good descriptive term that is not generating wrong associations and anxiety, or be very adamant about potential risk and don't hide them after the fact that is distributed. So it needs formats of an ongoing dialogue, but you can't talk to the whole society, so you need, and scientists, as scientists, we are not very well trained in communicating in easy language and leaving our bubble. So I think we need to do this proactively for other reasons anyway in our society, to make the case for science, which is challenged in many ways. But on this topic, it's especially important, so that it's, if it's effective, that is convincing, but for those who are not affected, to be also excited in a positive way.
I 100% agree, and I now thank the DKFZ for pointing me towards the right direction when naming my research group, because I wanted to call it synthetic immunology, and they said that the wording is a bit controversial, so we're now calling it immune engineering, which sounds very German, very engineer-driven. But because of the topic, we're actually exposed with that a ton of times, because we have a lot of private donors, but also politicians coming to see the lab, because we're promoting, we're doing gene therapy, and we're trying to do it in people soon. And when I talk to these people about gene editing, the question is never like, does it work? It's more like, what if it works too well? What if it works and only the wealthy can have access to it afterwards? Can it be misused? Can you also do bioweapons with it? It's completely different questions that I would at first completely, shake my head and but we have to get better at communicating this, because then it will be the same discussion that we had with the green gene editing technologies, but also and the ongoing discussion we have in the society about animal experiments, which is a topic that we haven't talked about tonight yet, but which are still integral and part of the regulatory process, by the way, also for cell and gene therapies. It's not just important to seek that dialogue early on, it's essential. Because at the end of the day, at least what we're doing is spending a lot of taxpayer money. You asked about where the money comes from. The taxpayers at the end of the day, approve it, and we're spending a lot of taxpayer money, and we're putting it in 12 people, and then we're all happy with the press release. But that's probably way too late. If we wait for the press release to come out and inform the public about this trial, it's like if you put people on a train and then ask them when the train is taken off and goes somewhere, if they're fine with the destination the train is going. It has to be earlier on, but I haven't thought about a good way of doing that early on. But I like these interactions we have with, as I said, like the politicians and the private donors, and I hope that this kind of disseminates a little bit. I mean, this is another example, right, of like, not teaching, that's a bit too drastically spoken, but like to at least inform a part of German society, and maybe hoping that they disseminate it and it's the next generation of scientists. But again, we're all likely in a bubble.
But it's really about proactive and honest. I think there is a large group of people interested in exciting biomedical developments. I would not underestimate that. But I think we must learn from the past here. In the earlier days of gene therapy, 25 years ago, we have made terrible mistakes. Although all of us knew it will not be possible to cure cancer with a p53 gene therapy, at the time, there were sort of, at least some of us raised high expectations. And that backlashed tremendously. That was one of the reasons why the Gelsinger case at the end of the day was so wildered. And we had a similar problem in the early days of stem cell therapy. I was involved in the early days of ES cell work because Oliver Wiestler was my postdoc at the time in Bonn. And there we also had a certain period where there were high hopes that based on multipotent or even pluripotent stem cells, Parkinson's would be cured, diabetes would disappear. And we really must learn from those episodes. That's why I say we must be proactive but honest. Tell people what we know, what expectations we can realistically have, and how we sort of address these issues. That's the best way to deal with it.
I think a very good example is, for instance, the use of thalidomide for treatment of multiple myeloma, right?
Always coming back to myeloma.
Well, it's an easy example. So thalidomide given to pregnant women in the 1960s, I believe it was, led to babies without arms or legs or missing. Yes, many. A lot of harm done. But now it is used as a treatment of multiple myeloma, but it comes with a pregnancy prevention program. So then, creating the right circumstances for still a very effective drug, kind of led to the repurposing of it, and it adds to the treatment possibilities of multiple myeloma. So I think that's a very good example. I must say that when I met Leonard and Laura, I knew something about synthetic biology, but not that much. So in the evenings I Googled around, and then I learned about xenobots, and I think that's also very interesting examples from I think it's Harvard and MIT, and also another group in the States, where they have created small groups of cells, and they were using AI to develop a specific function of those group of cells, with the idea that in the future you can transplant those kind of group of cells into patients and give them designated tasks. It sounds very futuristic, but it was very interesting. So they were able to create a group of cells which propelled themselves and were able to sort of bring other stem cells together, so they could kind of replicate. So the scientists were excited, really, to a very high level. But then the backlash that came from the public was enormous. Like posts like, "Do you think you're God?" Right? And we should immediately stop this kind of work. So, and that has to do with the fact that the public was not, involved in thinking about what these people were doing and what it could mean. And I think so. There is just an example of how it can not work out well if you don't invest or not consider that you should pay attention to the information sharing with the public.
Question is this again a discussion of patients or of healthy people? Because there is always, with much hope, much worries, I think, about effects of stuff. And if you, for example, you don't even have to go that far, if you consider chemotherapy, if chemotherapy wouldn't be established at this point and you would say to some patient, "Hey, I give you a toxic agent now, we know that there is a ton of long-term effects with those, you could die of a dose that is too high," but no one will question today to get if they get chemotherapy for their cancer if they are in a terrible situation. So it's all about communication and communication with our target group in the end. So I think we have to maybe establish, as Mr. Wiestler said, hopes and worries, and have to establish how we discuss about them and put them into order correctly.
Agreed.
I think that summarized it quite beautifully, or do you want to say something?
No, it's fine. Please. Please? Oh, okay, fine.
Go ahead.
Thalidomide is a wonderful example. And that's not only because my specialty is multiple myeloma. Thalidomide was clinically and societally completely dead. Like, that drug was buried in the 60s and people were afraid to look at it because we saw what the consequences were. And then now I'm again mentioning an American, but then Ben Ebert, who's now heading the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, was as bold as to just include that in a drug screen as well in his time, and actually worked with a German postdoc on trying to identify what thalidomide is actually doing, and they found this alternative pathway. And then people tried to bring it into multiple myeloma because we knew that multiple myeloma has this pathway activated. But it took a lot of risk-taking, I think. It took a lot of boldness, and it took a lot of communication at that point, not only by the scientists, but also by the pharmaceutical companies, which, for once, I'm also saying something positive about, and the regulators in letting this happen. And now we have a treatment that is used worldwide in multiple myeloma patients, and which is incredibly effective. And if we would have looked back and said, no, we're not touching this with a 10-foot pole anymore, this wouldn't have come to fruition. And now there's also further developments when it comes to thalidomide. And what you just mentioned is what I'm thinking about, the whole time, because at the end of the day, what we want to do, ideally, with genome editing, with synthetic biology, also synthetic immunology, is not to treat cancer when it's too late anymore, but rather try to prevent it from the get-go. One of our main research topics is trying to boost or modulate the elderly immune system in a way that it prevents cancer from happening. And that, at the moment, is the paper is hopefully coming out at some point, but at the moment it's working very well in mice. But it's an mRNA therapy, which we have a lot of trouble with right now in the world, and in Germany in particular, when it comes to acceptance. It's an mRNA therapy. It's basically LNP based. It's not an actual gene therapy, but we can improve the immune system of these mice so that they don't get cancer when they're old, so that they respond better to vaccines when they're old, and so they don't die of pneumonia, which is what most patients actually at the end of the day as cancer patients die from. So trying to get this preventive thing going, I think requires a huge PR effort, right? Because if you think about it, now we have the healthy people, and we're trying to convince healthy but elderly people that we want to make a clinical trial, or I mean that's in the future, but that's the idea. We want to make a clinical trial in the elderly with that immunopreventive, immunomodulatory treatment. So and the readout is, do they get more or less cancer from it, with side effects that they at that point don't know how fatal their eventual cancer might likely be, right? And with all of these uncertainties, because we don't know if that patient would have gotten cancer if they wouldn't have gotten the treatment so easy. So I'm just thinking about that out loud, and it's we haven't found a good solution, but I think this is where the future is, applying gene editing but also synthetic immunology, synthetic biology to prevent disease from happening.
Absolutely. I would not be so pessimistic. Think about the millions of people who take Mounjaro, it's the same thing.
And there's also no long-term data for Ozempic, right?
Okay.
I think if there's anything we can really take home tonight is that we as young scientists should take risks, we should be bold, we should fail and then try again, and I think you guys sitting here are the future if you're a scientist or just a science enthusiast. I mean, you can spread the word how great cell and gene therapies are, how great they could be, how great they can be, and now you can be bold by asking questions. So I want to open the panel up to the audience. I bet there are loads of questions and we'll try to answer as many as we can. Not all at the same time.
Hi. Thank you for the panel discussion, especially to Mirco for transparency. My name is Dorothea, and my question is for Professor Wiestler. I fail to understand how one can say that the 1.5 million price tag of a drug is economically justifiable, because it can confer to an individual possibly 80 years of a long and happy life. Because in my opinion, that is not the value-based pricing, it is coercive pricing, and I don't think that is ethical. So if you could tell us something.
Well, I would second that. That's what I was trying to say. Let's avoid this economical discussion for a moment. Let's consider the entire situation. Let's consider that we talk about treatments here for patients which had no alternative whatsoever at an early age. If this proves to be efficient, that in my view would be worth a major investment. But of course, at the end of the day, this will require a discussion within the society as well.
And I think there are different values that need to be balanced against each other, right? Because efficacy, so that means the benefit for this individual versus the side effects. As you said, it's not even so sure that it's a long-term effect. And then in the early days of treatment, people, I think at least the doctors were very excited about the effects, whether they last. So that's just on the individual basis. But then you always have a healthcare system. You have or the other patients, and there we have the principle of kind of an equal access. So it needs to be affordable, and you also have other diseases that are
is true. But that is a very difficult discussion.
It is, but I think it's also
you
societal.
see, we have chronically ill patients who need treatment for decades, and that also adds up to millions of euros at the end of the day. So I would rather like to avoid that discussion.
Well, it's
very difficult.
We need an economist.
You could argue about alcohol-induced liver diseases or lung cancer with smoking.
Yet another difference.
Exactly. is it worth to give a child with a genetic disease this treatment, and but we are giving millions of dollars into treating people who kind of created their cancer themselves. So I think this is such a hard question. No one will give a clear-cut answer to that in the end, and we have to discuss it, but it's really difficult.
But maybe not at this point. Don't forget, we are still a rich country. We have a rather well-funded healthcare system. Others would be happy about to have. So let's develop some of these treatments. First, let's demonstrate that they really help long-term, and if at a certain point in time we have to enter a serious economic discussion, we probably have to do that, but in a way it appears to be premature to me. One more.
Hello, thank you for the panel discussion. I had a question regarding mathematical models. Not regarding the theory behind it, but rather regarding regulations, because right now out of distribution predictions are kind of something that many groups are working on. So trying to predict something from a group which you trained on onto another group which wasn't seen by the model. And I wanted to ask you whether you think that those kind of models will even further make it difficult for drugs to be approved by making it another step that has to be kind of what is it called in English? Which has to be
Taken into consideration?
Yeah, taken into consideration before even approving the drug, or will it rather help it by maybe reducing animal experiments, by maybe having enough data at one point to only to omit all of these experiments altogether and just say from the mathematical model, okay, if it works in the model, then we might be able to try it out already.
I'm very optimistic on that. I have lately seen really spectacular developments in AI-based modeling, and I'm absolutely certain that this will facilitate many of the developments tremendously. This will have a major impact on drug development. It will have a major impact of individualized medicine. As a matter of fact, that's a real basis for individualized medicine. It is also the basis for preventive medicine, of the future smart AI-based data management. So I'm very optimistic on that. And keep in mind, this is still early days. This development is just starting. So I have high hopes that AI-based approaches will help us here a lot, and will help us also to reduce some of the animal experiments. I always felt the mouse is a useless model for the human, but that's a different philosophical question, which we could spend an hour on.
If I may add to that, I mean, I think it's currently also already used, right, for clinical pharmacology, for instance. You have the modeling and simulation studies, which will help you with those determinations. So, and I think there you see also uptake by the regulators of those kind of studies more and more. And so, I'm also optimistic in that respect. Yes.
For once, we're all optimistic on the same things. I'm also optimistic in that regard. I think a lot of you might know David Baker's work on AlphaFold and so on and so forth, which really, and this is day-to-day life now in pharmaceutical drug development, but we're still living in this small molecule era where this is actually working quite well.
That's already old days.
Yeah.
There's dynamic new models, totally different dimension.
Still, for the diversity of the human immune system, the best AI doesn't work. We currently cannot predict from a sequence, and this is the holy grail of immunology right now, from the sequence of a T-cell receptor, its antigen, or what the T-cell receptor is binding. Same for antibodies, but that's getting a bit better. But I'm perfectly sure that we're there, but the problem is, again, and you mentioned this, the data. The data has to be there, the data has to be true, and the problem is if you train an AI model on data that's not validated, right, and you kind of miss the ground truth. And right now, this TCR predictions don't work because all of the underlying data has been experimentally generated by different groups. Some of them, most of them, I think, Ton Schumacher has just said, is a big immunologist in Amsterdam. 70% of the sequences that he tried to reproduce didn't even work. If you now train an AI model on this and this is the only available data, obviously your model doesn't perform any better. And so what a lot of people are doing right now is to develop these foundation models coming from the clinics, coming from clinical samples, coming from clinical trial data, and we're also trying to develop that here in Heidelberg. But again, we're being kind of railed into a blockade by data management, by data safety, and we are currently trying a lot of very creative solutions to get around this. But the problem is that there's maybe at this case even not enough regulation because people haven't thought about it too much, and there's no infrastructure yet to support and to kind of framework the whole AI process. And this is again something that has to be done on a national, but ideally also on a European level, because at the moment generation is very hard and sharing is even harder. And if you take the pharmaceutical companies into the mix, it will become part of their proprietary tech. So they're the ones that will definitely not share their data sets for public use. And so I'm again arguing for academia to rally together and generate these models for public use.
And then we have one final question, as it seems.
Thank you very much for this interesting panel discussion. I very much enjoyed it. So my question is about one of the topics that was talked a lot about and offered often as a solution for many of the issues. It's like science communication. And like I'm still very young, but I feel like this has been like an issue or like a proposal for many years, for like the last 100 years, that science communication or the buzzword communication is really important. So over the past decades there have been a lot of improvement, but like what is the end goal? Because it's always there has to be more communication, but where does it stop, or when do we reach that there's enough communication, or is this something that's acquirable? So because it's always, the issues are always like we have to have more communication, but it has been that since for like 20 years or longer. So
but we don't communicate a lot, right? So if we look at it, do you have Instagram, TikTok accounts where you communicate your science? So I think that would be the way to go, because at the moment at Insta and TikTok there are only other kind of contents. But I think if you want to have a breadth of and outreach, you need to use the media, and nothing is more interesting as if young scientists just say, see, here's my lab, this is what I'm doing, and it's for any profession, but especially for science. So I think we could do way better than we do. And then I think at the times now, we might also need to teach how to survive any shitstorm and anybody who is attacking you, because that is what many of the influencers also experience who are talking science. So and there are good courses also to protect you here from the Science Media Center and the Gerald Stiftung. They have courses how to communicate and also survive certain attacks, because they are now targeted in a way. But I think we are way beyond any threshold where we can go public, except for press releases and so on. But then we don't reach society with press releases on a large scale, I think. That's my point.
Good entry point for your generation.
And I also think communication is a mean, not a goal, right? So, I think that was, so I think if you use, the goal is really to develop drug or to develop your science, right? And to create interest in that from investors or from people that have money. How do you call the societies that give you money to do the research again? Funding organizations, right? You should reach them and get them interested in I think therefore the communication is a mean.
I think with that, we will end the panel discussion. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much. That was super, super, super interesting. Special thanks to our speakers again. It was really, really, really incredible. We also have some gifts for you.
Do I also get one? That's lovely.
Also special thanks to Hendrik. Hendrik is from High Innovation. This is the transfer agency, and Hendrik is one of our big supporters. Hendrik, please come here. And then again, also special thanks to our team. We couldn't have done it alone. It was really a team effort. The team is there in the back. Thank you so much, guys. Yeah, and thank you also for coming. And I think now it's time for networking.
That's